The sun was sinking low over the western plains, painting the world in gold and blood. The wind carried whispers of war, the kind that starts not with a shout, but with the slow rhythm of hooves pressing into dry earth. From the high ridge came the Apache riders, 200 strong, their horses glinting like bronze under the dying light. The ground trembled beneath their march, yet among the warriors, silence ruled, a silence heavy enough to crush a man's courage. At the head of the line rode Chief Nalihi, his gray braids hanging like ropes of memory. Beside him, her eyes sharp as obsidian, rode Aiyana, his daughter. She was young, fierce, and quiet, the storm that watches before it strikes. Her heart burned with the same fire that ran through her father's people. Yet tonight, that fire flickered with something strange, something she didn't yet understand. Far ahead stood a lonely cabin of rough pine logs. Smoke curled from its chimney like a warning. Outside the cabin, a man waited, tall, lean, and steady as the land itself. Ethan Cole, a cowboy who had known both peace and regret. He was no stranger to the Apaches. Once he had fought against them. Once he had saved one of their own. And now, fate had brought him face to face with both his past and their vengeance. Aiyana's gaze fixed on him. She had heard his name in campfire stories. The white man who spoke with the tongue of her people. The one who once stood between her brother and a bullet. She wanted to hate him for what his kind had done. Yet as she watched him stand alone before 200 warriors, she saw no fear in him, only a strange, quiet sorrow. The chief raised his hand, and the thunder of hooves came to a stop. Dust swirled around them like ghosts. The air was thick with the weight of decision. From the cabin porch, Ethan lowered his rifle but didn't step back. He looked directly at the chief, and then at her. "Nalihi," Ethan called, his voice steady. "I didn't come for war." The chief said nothing. His face was carved from stone, unreadable, ancient. Aiyana felt the tension coil inside her chest like a rattlesnake. Around them, warriors tightened their grips on spears and rifles. For a long moment, the world stood still, the kind of silence that makes men question their courage. Then, faintly, the wind carried a sound from the horizon, the creak of saddles, the sigh of horses, the distant echo of history repeating itself. Aiyana's heart pounded. Her father's hand went to the hilt of his knife, and Ethan took one small step forward. The storm had arrived. Ethan's boots sank slightly into the dry earth as he stepped closer. The air felt heavier now, every breath laced with the scent of dust, leather, and danger. The Apache warriors shifted on their horses, waiting for their chief's signal. "The world seemed to hold its breath. I came here to talk," Ethan said quietly, his voice steady but carrying through the stillness. "Not to take, not to fight, just to make things right." Aiyana studied him from her saddle, her heart torn between suspicion and curiosity. Few white men ever spoke those words. Fewer still meant them. The tales she'd heard painted Ethan Cole as both a fighter and a savior, a man with blood on his hands, but also mercy in his soul. Now, seeing him in the fading sunlight, she wondered which truth was real. Chief Nalia's eyes narrowed. "Words," he said in a deep voice, "are wind. Wine cannot heal blood that's been spilled." Ethan nodded slowly. "You're right, but maybe it can stop more from spilling." A murmur ran through the warriors. The chief raised a hand and silence returned. He studied the man before him, the lone cowboy facing 200 riders, and for the first time, something like hesitation flickered behind his stern gaze. "Why should I listen to you, Ethan Cole?" Nalihi asked. "You were the face of those who drove our people from the river, who burned our homes. You think one man's guilt can wash away the white man's fire?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "No," he said, "but one man can try to end it." The chief dismounted, his boots landing in the dust. The warriors watched as he stepped forward, his presence commanding, ancient, unyielding. Ethan didn't move. Aiyana followed her father's motion with a worried glance. Something inside her told her this moment could end in death or something entirely new. Nalihi stopped only a few feet from the cowboy. The silence stretched again. Then, softly, the chief spoke. "You once saved my son," he said. "Yet now you stand on the same soil where his killers rode. Tell me, cowboy, why should I not let the wine take your last breath?" Ethan's eyes darkened. "Because your son didn't die in vain," he said. "Because I promised him I'd bring peace, even if it meant standing here alone. The words hung in the air like thunder waiting to strike. Aiyana felt her chest tighten. She could see truth in his eyes, and painted deep to fake. Her father stared hard at Ethan for what felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, he turned away. "Peace," he muttered. "We shall see if peace still breathes in a world made of bullets." He mounted his horse again and raised his hand. The warriors pulled back slightly but didn't leave. The storm hadn't passed. It had only shifted. As the night wind began to rise, Aiyana's eyes met Ethan's one last time. Neither spoke, yet something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness, not love, but recognition. Two souls trapped between war and what could be. And in that silent exchange, the story truly began. Night fell heavy and cold across the plains. The moon rose pale and distant, watching like a silent witness over the cabin and the Apache camp surrounding it. Fires flickered in the distance, their glow painting ghostly shapes on the ground. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the scent of smoke and tension. Inside the small cabin, Ethan sat by the dim light of a lantern. His hat lay on the table, his rifle resting across his knees. Every creak of the wooden walls reminded him he was still alive and still alone. Outside, he could hear the faint murmur of voices, the soft whinny of horses, the restless heartbeat of warriors waiting for dawn. He knew what they wanted: retribution, justice, or maybe just closure for years of blood spilled on both sides. Ethan had no illusions of being a hero. He was simply a man who had seen too much death and couldn't bear to add to it. Suddenly, a shadow moved outside the window. Ethan's hand went instinctively to his rifle, but then he froze. The silhouette was slender, graceful. It was Aiyana. A moment later, the door creaked open. Moonlight spilled across the floor as she stepped inside, her eyes sharp and bright against the gloom. "You should not be here," Ethan said quietly. "I could say the same," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "My father believes you speak of peace, but peace does not ride with 200 warriors." Ethan gave a faint, weary smile. "Then maybe they came to make sure I don't run." Aiyana's lips curved slightly, almost against her will, but then her gaze turned serious again. "He will test you, Cowboy. He will not trust words. He will want proof." Ethan leaned forward. "And what about you? Do you trust me?" For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Her eyes met his, steady and searching. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I saw the way you looked at him, not with fear, not with hate. I saw something else. My people call it narrated, the quiet courage." Ethan looked down, his hands tightening around his hat. "Your brother had it," he said softly. "That's why I couldn't let him die that day." Her expression flickered with pain and memory. "He spoke of you," she said after a pause. "He said the white man who saved him carried a burden he could not name." Ethan met her gaze again. "Maybe this is it," he said. "Maybe this is where I pay my debt." Outside, a distant coyote cried, breaking the silence. Aiyana turned toward the sound, her braids swaying gently. "Then be ready, Ethan Cole," she murmured, "because at sunrise, my father will decide if you live." She slipped out into the night, leaving only the soft scent of sage and the echo of her words behind. Ethan stared after her, the lantern flame trembling. The night seemed endless, and yet dawn was already coming for them both. Dawn broke like a blade across the horizon, sharp, golden, and merciless. The prairie was painted in fire and frost, every blade of grass glittering with dew and dust. From every direction came the sound of hooves, the Apache warriors, gathering once again around the lonely cabin. Their faces were painted, their eyes cold, their silence louder than war drums. Ethan stepped out of the cabin, rifle slung but hands empty. The early light washed over him, revealing the lines of exhaustion and resolve carved into his face. He knew this might be his final sunrise, yet his steps were steady. Chief Nalihi waited on horseback, his shadow long against the earth. Aiyana stood beside him, her expression unreadable, her eyes betraying only the faintest storm within. She had not slept. Her mind had been chasing questions the wind refused to answer. Nalihi raised his voice, deep as thunder. "Ethan Cole, you say you came for peace. Prove it now, or the earth will drink your blood." Ethan met the chief's gaze. "If you kill me, the army will come," he said calmly. "They'll burn this land again. I can't stop them, but I can warn them." I can tell them this land isn't theirs to take. That's why I'm here." The warriors murmured among themselves. Some laughed bitterly, others scowled. To them, white men's promises had always come too late. But Nalia's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in thought. Aiyana felt her heart twist. She wanted to believe him, and she feared she already did. She rode forward, dismounted, and stood between her father and the cowboy. Gasps rippled through the ranks. "Father," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the morning air. "He speaks with truth. I see it." Nalia's eyes hardened. "You would stand for him? Against your blood?" "I stand for peace," she replied, "for what my brother died believing in." The chief looked at her for a long, terrible moment. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. "If the wind carries false words," he said to Ethan, "we will find you again." Ethan nodded. "And I'll be here." The chief turned his horse. The warriors began to move, their formation breaking like a wave retreating from shore. Dust rose, sunlight blazed through it, and just like that, 200 shadows faded into the plains. Aiyana lingered. Her eyes found Ethan's one last time. "You'll keep your promise?" Say asked. Ethan smiled faintly, weary but sure. "I always keep my word." She gave a small nod and turned to ride away, her figure blending with the dawn. For a long while, Ethan stood there watching, the wind carrying her name through the grass like a prayer. The land was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. He looked toward the rising sun and whispered, "Maybe peace starts with one heartbeat at a time." Then he walked back into the cabin, the dust settling behind him, and the legend of that morning began to spread, carried by every wind across the plains.